But what a bound did Pegasus make when, for the first time, he felt the weight of a mortal man upon his loins. A bound indeed! Before he had time to draw a breath, Bellerophon found himself 500 feet aloft, and still shooting upward, while the winged horse snorted and trembled with terror and anger. Up he went, up, 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 until he plunged into the cold, misty bosom of a cloud, at which, only a little while before, Bellerophon had been gazing and fancying it a very pleasant spot. Then again, out of the heart of the cloud, Pegasus shot down like a thunderbolt, as if he meant to dash both himself and his rider headlong against a rock. Then he went through about 1,000 of the wildest caprioles that have ever been performed, either by a bird or a horse. I cannot tell you half that he did. He skimmed straight forward, and sidewise, and backward. He reared himself erect, with his fore legs on a wreath of mist, and his hind legs on nothing at all. He flung out his heels behind, and put down his head between his legs, with his wings pointing right upward. At about 2 miles height above the earth, he turned a somersault, so that Bellerophon's heels were up where his head should have been, and he seemed to look down into the sky instead of up. He twisted his head about, and looking Bellerophon in the face, with fire flashing from his eyes, made a terrible attempt to bite him. He fluttered his pinions so wildly that one of the silver feathers was shaken out, and, floating earthward, was picked up by the child, who kept it as long as he lived, in memory of Pegasus and Bellerophon. But the latter, who, as you may judge, was as good a horseman as ever galloped, had been watching his opportunity, and at last clapped the golden bit of the enchanted bridle between the winged steed's jaws. No sooner was this done than Pegasus became as manageable as if he had taken food all his life out of Bellerophon's hand. To speak what I really feel, it was almost a sadness to see so wild a creature grow suddenly so tame. And Pegasus seemed to feel it so, likewise. He looked round to Bellerophon, with the tears in his beautiful eyes, instead of the fire that had so recently flashed from them. But when Bellerophon patted his head, and spoke a few authoritative, yet kind and soothing words, another look came into the eyes of Pegasus, for he was glad at heart, after so many lonely centuries, to have found a companion and a master. Thus it always is with winged horses, and with all such wild and solitary creatures. If you can catch and overcome them, it is the surest way to win their love. While Pegasus had been doing his utmost to shake Bellerophon off his back, he had flown a very long distance. They had come within sight of the lofty mountain by the time the bit was in his mouth. Bellerophon had seen this mountain before, and knew it to be Helicon, on the summit of which was the winged horse's abode. Thither, after looking gently into the rider's face, as if to ask leave, Pegasus now flew, and, alighting, waited patiently until Bellerophon should please to dismount. The young man, accordingly, leaped from his steed's back, but still held him fast by the bridle. Meeting his eyes, however, he was so affected by the gentleness of his aspect, and by the thought of the free life which Pegasus had heretofore lived, that he could not bear to keep him a prisoner, if he really desired his liberty. Obeying this generous impulse, he slipped the enchanted bridle off the head of Pegasus, and took the bit from his mouth. "Leave me, Pegasus," said he. "Either leave me or love me." In an instant the winged horse shot almost out of sight, soaring straight upward from the summit of Mount Helicon. Being long after sunset, it was now twilight on the mountain top, and dusky evening over all the country round about it. But Pegasus flew so high that he overtook the departed day, and was bathed in the upper radiance of the sun. Ascending higher and higher, he looked a bright speck, and at last could no longer be seen in the hollow waste of the sky. And Bellerophon was afraid that he should never behold him any more. But, while he was lamenting his own folly, the bright speck reappeared, and drew nearer and nearer, until it descended lower than the sunshine. And behold, Pegasus had come back. After this trial, there was no more fear of the winged horse making his escape. He and Bellerophon were friends, and put loving faith in one another. That night they lay down and slept together, with Bellerophon's arm about the neck of Pegasus, not as a caution, but for kindness. And they awoke at peep of day, and bade one another good morning, each in his own language. In this manner Bellerophon and the wonderful steed spent several days, and grew better and better acquainted, and fonder of each other all the time. They went on long aerial journeys, and sometimes ascended so high that the earth looked hardly bigger than the moon. They visited distant countries and amazed the inhabitants, who thought that the beautiful young man on the back of the winged horse must have come down out of the sky. 1,000 miles a day was no more than an easy space for the fleet Pegasus to pass over. Bellerophon was delighted with this kind of life, and would have liked nothing better than to live always in the same way, aloft in the clear atmosphere, for it was always sunny weather up there, however cheerless and rainy it might be in the lower region. But he could not forget the horrible chimera, which he had promised King Iobates to slay. So, at last, when he had become well accustomed to feats of horsemanship in the air, and could manage Pegasus with the least motion of his hand, and had taught him to obey his voice, he determined to attempt the performance of this perilous adventure. At daybreak, therefore, as soon as he unclosed his eyes, he gently pinched the winged horse's ear in order to arouse him. Pegasus immediately started from the ground, and pranced about 1/4 mile aloft, and made a grand sweep around the mountain top, by way of showing that he was wide awake and ready for any kind of excursion. During the whole of this little flight, he uttered a loud, brisk, and melodious neigh, and finally came down at Bellerophon's side, as lightly as ever you saw a sparrow hop upon a twig. "Well done, dear Pegasus! Well done, my sky skimmer!" cried Bellerophon fondly, stroking the horse's neck. "And now, my fleet and beautiful friend, we must break our fast. Today we are to fight the terrible chimera." As soon as they had eaten their morning meal, and drank some sparkling water from a spring called Hippocrene, Pegasus held out his head of his own accord, so that his master might put on the bridle. Then, with a great many playful leaps and airy caperings, he showed his impatience to be gone, while Bellerophon was girding on his sword, and hanging his shield about his neck, and preparing himself for battle. When everything was ready, the rider mounted, and, as was his custom when going a long distance, ascended 5 miles perpendicularly, so as the better to see whither he was directing his course. He then turned the head of Pegasus toward the east, and set out for Lycia. In their flight they overtook an eagle, and came so nigh him, before he could get out of their way, that Bellerophon might easily have caught him by the leg. Hastening onward at this rate, it was still early in the forenoon when they beheld the lofty mountains of Lycia, with their deep and shaggy valleys. If Bellerophon had been told truly, it was in one of those dismal valleys that the hideous chimera had taken up its abode. Being now so near their journey's end, the winged horse gradually descended with his rider, and they took advantage of some clouds that were floating over the mountain tops in order to conceal themselves. Hovering on the upper surface of a cloud, and peeping over its edge, Bellerophon had a pretty distinct view of the mountainous part of Lycia, and could look into all its shadowy vales at once. At first there appeared to be nothing remarkable. It was a wild, savage, and rocky tract of high and precipitous hills. In the more level part of the country, there were the ruins of houses that had been burned, and, here and there, the carcasses of dead cattle, strewn about the pastures where they had been feeding. The chimera must have done this mischief, thought Bellerophon. But where can the monster be? As I have already said, there was nothing remarkable to be detected at first sight, in any of the valleys and dells that lay among the precipitous heights of the mountains. Nothing at all, unless, indeed, it were 3 spires of black smoke, which issued from what seemed to be the mouth of a cavern, and clambered sullenly into the atmosphere. Before reaching the mountain top, these 3 black smoke wreaths mingled themselves into one. The cavern was almost directly beneath the winged horse and his rider, at the distance of about 1,000 feet. The smoke, as it crept heavily upward, had an ugly, sulphurous, stifling scent, which caused Pegasus to snort and Bellerophon to sneeze. So disagreeable was it to the marvelous steed, who was accustomed to breathe only the purest air, that he waved his wings and shot 1/2 mile out of the range of this offensive vapor. But, on looking behind him, Bellerophon saw something that induced him first to draw the bridle, and then to turn Pegasus about. He made a sign which the winged horse understood, and sunk slowly through the air, until his hooves were scarcely more than a man's height above the rocky bottom of the valley. In front, as far off as you could throw a stone, was the cavern's mouth, with 3 smoke wreaths oozing out of it. And what else did Bellerophon behold there? There seemed to be a heap of strange and terrible creatures curled up within the cavern. Their bodies lay so close together that Bellerophon could not distinguish them apart, but, judging by their heads, one of these creatures was a huge snake, the second a fierce lion, and the third an ugly goat. The lion and the goat were asleep. The snake was broad awake and kept staring around him with a great pair of fiery eyes. But, and this was the most wonderful part of the matter, the 3 spires of smoke evidently issued from the nostrils of these 3 heads. So strange was the spectacle that, though Bellerophon had been all along expecting it, the truth did not immediately occur to him, that here was the terrible 3-headed chimera. He had found the chimera's cavern. The snake, the lion, and the goat, as he supposed them to be, were not 3 separate creatures, but one monster. The wicked, hateful thing, slumbering as 2/3 of it were, it still held in its abominable claws the remnants of an unfortunate lamb, or possibly, but I hate to think it so, it was a dear little boy, which its 3 mouths had been gnawing before 2 of them fell asleep. All at once Bellerophon started as if from a dream, and knew it to be the chimera. Pegasus seemed to know it at the same instant, and sent forth a neigh that sounded like the call of a trumpet to battle. At this sound the 3 heads reared themselves erect, and belched out great flashes of flame. Before Bellerophon had time to consider what to do next, the monster flung itself out of the cavern and sprang straight towards him, with its immense claws extended and its snaky tail twisting itself venomously behind. If Pegasus had not been as nimble as a bird, both he and his rider would have been overthrown by the chimera's headlong rush, and thus the battle have ended before it was well begun. But the winged horse was not to be caught so. In the twinkling of an eye he was up and aloft, halfway to the clouds, snorting with anger. He shuddered, too, not with fright, but with utter disgust at the loathsomeness of this poisonous thing with 3 heads. The chimera, on the other hand, raised itself up so as to stand absolutely on the tip end of its tail, with its talons pawing fiercely in the air, and its 3 heads sputtering fire at Pegasus and his rider. My stars, how it roared and hissed and bellowed! Bellerophon, meanwhile, was fitting his shield onto his arm, and drawing his sword. "Now, my beloved Pegasus," he whispered into the winged horse's ear, "thou must help me to slay this insufferable monster, or else thou shalt fly back to thy solitary mountain peak without thy friend Bellerophon. For either the chimera dies, or its 3 mouths shall gnaw this head of mine, which has slumbered upon thy neck." Pegasus whinnied, and turning back his head, rubbed his nose tenderly against his rider's cheek. It was his way of telling him that, though he had wings and was an immortal horse, yet he would perish, if it were possible for immortality to perish, rather than leave Bellerophon behind. "I thank you, Pegasus," answered Bellerophon. "Now then, Let us make a dash at the monster." Uttering these words, he shook the bridle, and Pegasus darted down aslant, as swift as the flight of an arrow, right towards the chimera's threefold head, which, all this time, was poking itself as high as it could into the air. As he came within arm's length, Bellerophon made a cut at the monster, but was carried onward by his steed before he could see whether the blow had been successful. Pegasus continued his course, but soon reeled round, at about the same distance from the chimera as before. Bellerophon then perceived that he had cut the goat's head almost off, so that it dangled downward by the skin and seemed quite dead. But to make amends, the snake's head and the lion's head had taken all the fierceness of the dead one into themselves, and spit flame, and hissed, and roared, with a vast deal more fury than before. "Never mind, my brave Pegasus," cried Bellerophon. "With another stroke like that, we will stop either its hissing or its roaring." And again he shook the bridle. Dashing aslantwise, as before, the winged horse made another arrow flight toward the chimera, and Bellerophon aimed another downward stroke at one of the two remaining heads, as he shot by. But this time, neither he nor Pegasus escaped so well as the first. With one of its claws, the chimera had given the young man a deep scratch in his shoulder, and had slightly damaged the left wing of the flying steed with the other. On his part, Bellerophon had mortally wounded the lion's head of the monster, insomuch that it now hung downward, with its fire almost extinguished, and sending out gasps of thick black smoke. The snake's head, however, which was the only one left now, was twice as fierce and venomous as ever before. It belched forth shoots of fire 500 yards long, and emitted hisses so loud, so harsh, and so ear-piercing that King Iobates heard them 50 miles off, and trembled till the throne shook under him. "Well-a-day," thought the poor king, "the chimera is certainly coming to devour me." Meanwhile Pegasus had again paused in the air, and neighed angrily, while sparkles of a pure crystal flame darted out of his eyes. How unlike the lurid fire of the chimera! The aerial steed's spirit was all aroused, and so was that of Bellerophon. "Dost thou bleed, my immortal horse?" cried the young man, caring less for his own hurt than for the anguish of this glorious creature, that ought never to have tasted pain. "The execrable chimera shall pay for this mischief with his last head." Then he shook the bridle, shouted loudly, and guided Pegasus, not aslantwise as before, but straight at the monster's hideous front. So rapid was the onset that it seemed but a dazzle and a flash before Bellerophon was at close grips with his enemy. The chimera, by this time, after losing its second head, had got into a red-hot passion of pain and rampant rage. It so flounced about, half on earth and partly in the air, that it was impossible to say which element it rested upon. It opened its snake jaws to such an abominable width that Pegasus might almost have flown right down its throat, wings outspread, rider and all. At their approach it shot out a tremendous blast of its fiery breath, and enveloped Bellerophon and his steed in a perfect atmosphere of flame, singeing the wings of Pegasus, scorching off one whole side of the young man's golden ringlets, and making them both far hotter than was comfortable, from head to foot. But this was nothing to what followed. When the airy rush of the winged horse had brought him within the distance of 100 yards, the chimera gave a spring and flung its huge, awkward, venomous, and utterly detestable carcass right upon poor Pegasus, clung around him with might and main, and tied up in its snaky tail into a knot. Up flew the aerial steed, higher, higher, higher above the mountain peaks, above the clouds, and almost out of sight of the solid earth. But still the earth-born monster kept its hold, and was borne upward, along with the creature of light and air. Bellerophon, meanwhile, turning about, found himself face to face with the ugly grimness of the chimera's visage, and could only avoid being scorched to death, or bitten right in twain, by holding up his shield. Over the upper edge of the shield, he looked sternly into the savage eyes of the monster. But the chimera was so mad with wild pain and grief that it did not guard itself so well as might else have been the case. Perhaps, after all, the best way to fight a chimera is by getting as close to it as you can. In its effort to stick its horrible iron claws into its enemy, the creature left its own breast quite exposed, and, perceiving this, Bellerophon thrust his sword up to the hilt into its cruel heart. Immediately the snaky tail untied its knot. The monster let go of its hold of Pegasus, and fell from that vast height downward, while the fire within its bosom, instead of being put out, burned fiercer than ever, and quickly began to consume the dead carcass. Thus it fell out of the sky, all aflame, and it being nightfall before it reached the earth, was mistaken for a shooting star or a comet. But at early sunrise, some cottagers were going for their day's labor, and saw, to their astonishment, that several acres of ground were strewn with black ashes. In the middle of a field there was a heap of whitened bones, a great deal higher than a haystack. Nothing else was ever seen of the dreadful chimera. And when Bellerophon had won his victory, he bent forward and kissed Pegasus, while the tears stood in his eyes. "Back now, my beloved steed," said he, "back to the fountain of Pirene." Pegasus skimmed through the air, quicker than ever he did before, and reached the fountain in a very short time. And there he found the old man leaning on his staff, and the country fellow watering his cow, and the pretty maiden filling her pitcher. "I remember now," quoth the old man. "I saw this winged horse once before, when I was quite a lad, but he was 10 times handsomer in those days." "I own a cart horse worth 3 of him," said the country fellow. "If this pony were mine, the first thing I should do would be to clip his wings." But the poor maiden said nothing, for she had always the luck to be afraid at the wrong time. So she ran away, and let her pitcher tumble down, and broke it. "Where is the gentle child," asked Bellerophon, "who used to keep me company, and never lost his faith, and never was weary of gazing into the fountain?" "Here I am, dear Bellerophon," said the child softly. For the little boy had spent day after day on the margin of Pirene, waiting for his friend to come back. But when he perceived Bellerophon descending through the clouds, mounted on the winged horse, he had shrunk back into the shrubbery. He was a delicate and tender child, and dreaded lest the old man and the country fellow should see the tears gushing from his eyes. "Thou hast won the victory," said he joyfully, running to the knee of Bellerophon, who still sat on the back of Pegasus. "I knew thou wouldst." "Yes, dear child," replied Bellerophon, alighting from the winged horse. "But if thy faith had not helped me, I should never have waited for Pegasus, and never have gone up above the clouds, and never conquered the terrible chimera. Thou, my beloved little friend, hast done it all. And now let us give Pegasus his liberty." So he slipped off the enchanted bridle from the head of the marvelous steed. "Be free for evermore, my Pegasus," cried he, with a shade of sadness in his tone. "Be as free as thou art fleet." But Pegasus rested his head on Bellerophon's shoulder, and would not be persuaded to take flight. "Well then," said Bellerophon, caressing the airy horse, "thou shalt be with me as long as thou wilt, and we will go together forthwith and tell King Iobates that the chimera is destroyed." Then Bellerophon embraced the gentle child, and promised to come to him again, and departed. But, in after years, that child took higher flights upon the aerial steed than ever did Bellerophon, and achieved more honorable deeds than his friend's victory over the chimera. For, gentle and tender as he was, he grew to be a mighty poet. Pegasus, the Winged Horse, by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Percival, from Bullfinch's Mythology, by Thomas Bullfinch. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Percival. The father and 2 elder brothers of Percival had fallen in battle or tournaments, and hence, as the last hope of his family, his mother retired with him into a solitary region, where he was brought up in total ignorance of arms and chivalry. He was allowed no weapon but a little Scotch spear, which was the only thing of all her lord's fair gear that his mother carried to the wood with her. In the use of this he became so skilful that he could kill with it not only the animals of the chase for the table, but even birds on the wing. At length, however, Percival was roused to a desire of military renown by seeing in the forest 5 knights who were in complete armour. He said to his mother, "Mother, what are those yonder?" "They are angels, my son," said she. "By my faith, I will go and become an angel with them." And Percival went to the road and met them. "Tell me, good lad," said one of them, "sawest thou a knight pass this way either today or yesterday?" "I know not," said he, "what a knight is." "Such a one as I am," said the knight. "If thou wilt tell me what I ask thee, I will tell thee what thou asketh me." "Gladly I will do so," said Sir Owain, for that was the knight's name. "What is this?" demanded Percival, touching the saddle. "It is a saddle," said Sir Owain. Then he asked about all the accoutrements which he saw upon the men and the horses, and about the arms, and what they were for, and how they were used. And Sir Owain showed him all those things fully, and Percival in return gave him such information as he had. Then Percival returned to his mother and said to her, "Mother, those were not angels, but honourable knights." Then his mother swooned away, and Percival went to the place where they kept the horses that carried firewood and provisions for the castle, and he took a bony piebald horse, which seemed to him the strongest of them, and he pressed a pack into the form of a saddle, and with twisted twigs he imitated the trappings which he had seen upon the horses. When he came again to his mother, the countess had recovered from her swoon. "My son," said she, "desirest thou to ride forth?" "Yes, with thy leave," said he. "Go forward then," she said, "to the court of Arthur, where there are the best and the noblest and the most bountiful of men, and tell him thou art Percival, the son of Pellinore, and ask of him to bestow knighthood on thee. And whenever thou seest a church, repeat there thy paternoster, and if thou see meat and drink, and hast need of them, thou mayest take them. If thou hear an outcry of one in distress, proceed toward it, especially if it be the cry of a woman, and render her what service thou canst. If thou see a fair jewel, win it, for thus shalt thou acquire fame. Yet freely give it to another, for thus thou shalt obtain praise. If thou see a fair woman, pay court to her, for thus thou wilt obtain love." After this discourse Percival mounted the horse, and taking a number of sharp-pointed sticks in his hand, he rode forth. And he rode far in the woody wilderness, without food or drink. At last he came to an opening in the wood, where he saw a tent, and as he thought it might be a church, he said his paternoster to it. And he went towards it, and the door of the tent was open, and Percival dismounted and entered the tent. In the tent he found a maiden sitting, with a golden frontlet on her forehead, and a gold ring on her hand. And Percival said, "Maiden, I salute you, for my mother told me whenever I met a lady I must respectfully salute her." Perceiving in one corner of the tent some food, 2 flasks full of wine, and some boar's flesh roasted, he said, "My mother told me whenever I saw meat and drink to take it," and he ate greedily, for he was very hungry. The maiden said, "Sir, thou hadst best go quickly from here, for fear that my friends should come, and evil should befall you." But Percival said, "My mother told me wheresoever I saw a fair jewel to take it," and he took the gold ring from her finger, and put it on his own, and he gave the maiden his own ring in exchange for hers. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. Percival journeyed on till he arrived at Arthur's court, and it so happened that just at that time an uncourteous knight had offered Queen Guinevere a gross insult. For when her page was serving the queen with a golden goblet, this knight struck the arm of the page and dashed the wine in the queen's face and over her stomacher. Then he said, "If any have boldness to avenge this insult to Guinevere, let him follow me to the meadow." So the knight took his horse and rode to the meadow, carrying away the golden goblet. And all the household hung down their heads, and no one offered to follow the knight to take vengeance upon him, for it seemed to them that no one could have ventured on so daring an outrage unless he possessed such powers through magic or charms that none could be able to punish him. Just then, behold, Perceval entered the hall upon the bony piebald horse, with his uncouth trappings. In the centre of the hall stood Kay, the seneschal. "Tell me, tall man," said Perceval, "is that Arthur yonder?" "What wouldst thou with Arthur?" asked Kay. "My mother told me to go to Arthur, and receive knighthood from him." "By my faith," said he, "thou art all too meanly equipped with horse and with arms." Then all the household began to jeer and laugh at him. But there was a certain damsel who had been a whole year at Arthur's court, and had never been known to smile. And the king's fool had said that this damsel would not smile till she had seen him who would be the flower of chivalry. Now this damsel came up to Perceval and told him, smiling, that if he lived he would be one of the bravest and best of knights. "Truly," said Kay, "thou art ill taught to remain a year at Arthur's court, with choice of society, and smile on no one, and now before the face of Arthur and all his knights to call such a man as this the flower of knighthood." And he gave her a box on the ear, that she fell senseless to the ground. Then said Kay to Perceval, "Go after the knight who went hence to the meadow, overthrow him, and recover the golden goblet, and possess thyself of his horse and arms, and thou shalt have knighthood." "I will do so, tall man," said Perceval. So he turned his horse's head toward the meadow, and when he came there the knight was riding up and down, proud of his strength and valour and noble mien. "Tell me," said the knight, "didst thou see any one coming after me from the court?" "The tall man that was there," said Perceval, "told me to come and overthrow thee, and to take from thee the goblet and thy horse and armour for myself." "Silence," said the knight. "Go back to the court, and tell Arthur either to come himself, or to send some other to fight with me, and unless he do so quickly, I will not wait for him." "By my faith," said Perceval, "choose thou whether it shall be willingly or unwillingly, for I will have the horse and the arms and the goblet." Upon this the knight ran at him furiously, and struck him a violent blow with the shaft of his spear, between the neck and the shoulder. "Ha, ha, lad," said Perceval, "my mother's servants were not used to play with me in this wise, so thus will I play with thee." And he threw at him one of the sharp-pointed sticks, and it struck him in the eye, and came out the back of his head, so that he fell down lifeless. "Verily," said Sir Owain, the son of Urien, to Kay the seneschal, "thou wast ill advised to send that madman after the knight, for he must either be overthrown or flee, and either way it will be a disgrace to Arthur and his warriors. Therefore will I go to see what has befallen him." So Sir Owain went to the meadow, and he found Perceval trying in vain to get the dead knight's armour off, in order to clothe himself with it. Sir Owain unfastened the armour, and helped Perceval to put it on, and taught him how to put his foot in the stirrup and use the spur, for Perceval had never used stirrup nor spur, but rode without saddle, and urged on his horse with a stick. Then Owain would have had him return to the court, to receive the praise that was his due, but Perceval said, "I will not come to the court till I have encountered the tall man that is there, to revenge the injury he did to the maiden. But take thou the goblet to Queen Guinevere, and tell King Arthur that, wherever I am, I will be his vassal, and will do him what profit and service I can." And Sir Owain went back to the court, and related all these things to Arthur and Guinevere, and to all the household. And Perceval rode forward, and he came to a lake, on the side of which was a fair castle, and on the border of the lake he saw a hoary-headed man sitting upon a velvet cushion, and his attendants were fishing in the lake. When the hoary-headed man beheld Perceval approaching, he arose and went into the castle. Perceval rode to the castle, and the door was open, and he entered the hall. And the hoary-headed man received Perceval courteously, and asked him to sit by him on the cushion. When it was time, the tables were set, and they went to meat. And when they had finished their meat, the hoary-headed man asked Perceval if he knew how to fight with the sword. "I know not," said Perceval, "but were I to be taught, doubtless I should." And the hoary-headed man said to him, "I am thy uncle, thy mother's brother. I am called King Peshur. Thou shalt remain with me a space, in order to learn the manners and customs of different countries, and courtesy and noble bearing. And this do thou remember, if thou seest aught to cause thy wonder, ask not the meaning of it. If no one has the courtesy to inform thee, the reproach will not fall upon thee, but upon me that am thy teacher." While Perceval and his uncle discoursed together, Perceval beheld two youths enter the hall bearing a golden cup and a spear of mighty size, with blood dripping from its point to the ground. And when all the company saw this, they began to weep and lament. But for all that, the man did not break off his discourse with Perceval, and as he did not tell him the meaning of what he saw, he forbare to ask him concerning it. Now the cup that Perceval saw was the sangreal, and the spear the sacred spear. And afterwards King Peshur removed with those sacred relics into a far country. One evening Perceval entered a valley, and came to a hermit's cell, and the hermit welcomed him gladly, and there he spent the night. And in the morning he arose, and when he went forth, behold, a shower of snow had fallen in the night, and a hawk had killed a wild fowl in front of the cell. And the noise of the horse had scared the hawk away, and a raven alighted on the bird. And Perceval stood and compared the blackness of the raven, and the whiteness of the snow, and the redness of the blood, to the hair of the lady that best he loved, which was blacker than jet, and to her skin, which was whiter than the snow, and to the two red spots upon her cheeks, which were redder than the blood upon the snow. Now Arthur and his household were in search of Perceval, and by chance they came that way. "Know ye," said Arthur, "who is the knight with the long spear that stands by the brook up yonder?" "Lord," said one of them, "I will go and learn who he is." So the youth came to the place where Perceval was, and asked him what he did thus, and who he was. But Perceval was so intent upon his thought that he gave him no answer, and the youth thrust at Perceval with his lance, and Perceval turned upon him and struck him to the ground. And when the youth returned to the king and told how rudely he had been treated, Sir Kay said, "I will go myself." And when he greeted Perceval and got no answer, he spoke to him rudely and angrily. And Perceval thrust at him with his lance, and cast him down, so that he broke his arm and his shoulder blade. And while he lay thus stunned, his horse returned back at a wild and prancing pace. Then said Sir Gawain, surnamed the Golden Tongue, because he was the most courteous knight in Arthur's court, "It is not fitting that any should disturb an honourable knight from his thought unadvisedly, for either he is pondering some damage that he has sustained, or he is thinking of the lady whom best he loves. If it seem well to thee, lord, I will go and see if this knight has changed from his thought, and if he has, I will ask him courteously to come and visit thee." And Perceval was resting on the shaft of his spear, pondering the same thought, and Sir Gawain came to him and said, "If I thought it would be as agreeable to thee as it would be to me, I would converse with thee. I have also a message from Arthur unto thee, to pray thee to come and visit him, and the two men before have been on this errand." "That is true," said Perceval, "and uncourteously they came. They attacked me, and I was annoyed thereat." Then he told him the thought that occupied his mind, and Gawain said, "This was not an ungentle thought, and I should marvel if it were pleasant for thee to be drawn from it." Then said Perceval, "Tell me, is Sir Kay in Arthur's court?" "He is," said Gawain, "and truly he is the knight who fought with thee last." "Verily," said Perceval, "I am not sorry to have thus avenged the insult to the smiling maiden." Then Perceval told him his name, and said, "Who art thou?" And he replied, "I am Gawain." "I am right glad to meet thee," said Perceval, "for I have everywhere heard of thy prowess and uprightness, and I solicit thy friendship." "Thou shalt have it, by my faith, and grant me thine," said he. "Gladly will I do so," answered Perceval. So they went together to Arthur and saluted him. "Behold, Lord," said Gawain, "him whom thou hast sought so long." "Welcome unto thee, chieftain," said Arthur. And hereupon there came the queen and her handmaidens, and Perceval saluted them, and they were rejoiced to see him, and bade him welcome. And Arthur did him great honour and respect, and they returned towards Caerleon. End of Perceval, from Bulfinch's Mythology by Thomas Bulfinch. Read by Phil Schampf.
How Thor Got the Hammer by E. Louise Smythe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. How Thor Got the Hammer. Sif was Thor's wife. Sif had long golden hair. Thor was very proud of Sif's golden hair. Thor was always going on long journeys. One day he went off and left Sif alone. She went out on the porch and fell asleep. Loki came along. He was always playing tricks. He saw Sif lying asleep. He said, "I am going to cut off her hair." So Loki went up on the porch and cut off Sif's golden hair. When Sif woke up and saw that her hair was gone, she cried and cried. Then she ran to hide. She did not want Thor to see her. When Thor came home, he could not find Sif. "Sif, Sif," he called, "where are you?" But Sif did not answer. Thor looked all around the house. At last he found her crying. "Oh, Thor, look, all my hair is gone. Somebody has cut it off. It was a man. He ran away with it." Then Thor was very angry. He said, "I know it was Loki. He is always getting into mischief. Just wait until I get him." And Thor went out to find Loki. Pretty soon he found him. Thor said, "Did you cut off Sif's hair?" Loki said, "Yes, I did." "Then you must pay for cutting off my wife's hair," said Thor. "All right," said Loki. "I will get you something better than the hair." Loki went down into the ground to the home of the dwarfs. It was very dark down there. The only light came from the dwarfs' fires. The dwarves were ugly little black men. They were not any bigger than your thumb. They had crooked backs and crooked legs. Their eyes looked like black beads. Loki said, "Can you make me a gold crown that will grow like real hair?" The dwarves said, "Yes, we can." So the busy little dwarves worked all night. When the morning came, the dwarves gave Loki his crown of golden hair. They gave him a spear and a ship too. Loki took the things up to Asgard where the gods all lived. Then the gods all came up to him. He showed them the things. The gods said, "They are very wonderful." And Loki said, "Oh, nobody else can make such things as my little dwarfs." A little dwarf named Brock was standing nearby. He heard Loki say that. Then he stepped up and said, "My brother can make just as good things as these." Loki laughed and said, "If you can get 3 things as wonderful as these, I'll give you my head." Brock went down into the ground where his little dwarves were working. Brock's brother was named Sindri. He said to his brother, "Loki says that you can't make such nice things as his dwarves can. He said that he would give me his head if I could get him such wonderful things as his." This made the dwarves angry. Their eyes grew big. They said, "He will see what we can do." Sindri wanted to know what the wonderful things were. Brock said, Loki has a golden crown that will grow like real hair, a ship that can go anywhere, and a spear that never misses the mark. We will show him, said the dwarves. The dwarves soon had the fires burning. Then Sindri put a pigskin into the fire. He gave the bellows to Brock and said, Now blow as hard as you can. Then Sindri went out. Brock blew and blew. A little fly came in and bit him on the hand. The fly bit him so hard that Brock thought he would have to stop blowing, but he did not. Then Sindri came back. He took out a golden pig from the fire. He put a lump of gold into the fire. He said to Brock, Blow and do not stop. Then Sindri went out again. So Brock blew as hard as he could. Then the same fly came in and bit him again. Brock thought that he could not stand it, but he kept on. When Sindri came back, he took a gold ring from the fire. Then Sindri put a lump of iron into the fire. He said to Brock, Now blow as hard as you can. And Sindri went out. Brock blew and blew. The same mean fly came again and bit him on the forehead. It bit so hard that blood ran into his eyes. Brock put up his hand to brush away the fly. Just then Sindri came back. He took the hammer out of the fire. There, he said, you have almost spoiled it. The handle is too short, but it cannot be helped now. Brock hurried up to Asgard with his things. All the gods came around to see. Then Loki came up to show his things. He put the crown of gold on Sif's head, and it began to grow like real hair. He gave the spear to Odin and said, This spear will never miss its mark. Then he took out the ship. He said, This is a wonderful ship. It will sail on any sea, and yet you can fold it up and put it into your pocket. Loki felt proud, for he thought his things were the best. All the gods felt very sorry for little Brock. They thought Loki's things were fine. They were afraid Brock's would not be so nice. They said, Now, Brock, show your things. Brock took out the gold ring. He said, Each night this ring will throw off a ring just like it. He gave the ring to Odin. Then Brock took out the golden pig. He said, This pig can go anywhere, on the ground or in the air. It can go faster than any horse. If the night is dark, the shining pig will make it light. Then Brock showed the hammer. He said, This is not a very pretty hammer. When I was making it, Loki turned himself into a fly and made me spoil it. The fly bit me so hard that I had to stop blowing, so the handle is a little short, but it is a wonderful hammer. If you throw it at anything, it will hit the mark and come back to you. The gods picked up the hammer and passed it around. They said, It will be just the things with which to keep the frost giants out of Asgard. The gods said, Brock's things are the best. Brock gave the hammer to Thor. That is the way Thor got his wonderful hammer. Then Brock said to Loki, You said I could have your head if my things were the best. Loki was angry and said, Yes, I told you that you could have my head, but you can't touch my neck. Of course, Brock could not get his head without touching his neck. So Brock did not get Loki's head. End of How Thor Got the Hammer by E. Louise Smythe. The Hammer Lost and Found by E. Louise Smythe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Hammer Lost and Found. The frost giants did not like the sunshine. They did not like to see the flowers. They did not like to hear the birds sing. They wanted to spoil everything. The frost giants wanted to get into Asgard, but they didn't know how. They were afraid of Thor and his hammer. They said, "If only we can get the hammer, we can get into Asgard." They talked and planned all night. At last one frost giant said, "I know how we can get the hammer. I will dress in a bird suit. Then I will fly up to Thor's house and get the hammer." The next night the frost giant flew into the house while Thor was asleep. He took the hammer and flew away with it. When Thor woke, he put out his hand to get the hammer. It was gone. He said, "Loki, the hammer is gone. The frost giants have taken it. We must get it back." Loki said, "I can get it back, if Freya will let me have her falcon suit." So he went to Freya and said, "Will you let me have your falcon suit? I can get the hammer back if you will." Freya said, "Yes, of course I will. If I had a gold suit, you could have it. Anything to get the hammer back." Loki took the falcon suit and put it on. He flew over the city. All the people saw him flying. They said, "What a strange bird." They did not know that it was Loki going for the hammer. When Loki came to the city of the frost giants, he took off the falcon suit. He walked and walked until he came to Thrym's house. Thrym was the giant who took the hammer. Thrym was sitting on the porch making gold collars for his dogs. When he saw Loki, he said, "What do you want?" Loki said, "I have come for the hammer." The old giant laughed and said, "You will never get that hammer. It is buried 8 miles deep in the ground. But there is one way you can get it. I will give you the hammer if you get Freya for my wife." So Loki went back to Asgard. Thor said, "Well, did you get the hammer?" "No, but we can get it if Freya will be Thrym's wife." Then they went to Freya's house. They said, "Put on your very best clothes and come with us. You must be Thrym's wife." Freya said, "Do you think I will be the frost giant's wife? I won't be his wife." Thor said, "We can get the hammer back if you will." But Freya said, "No, I will not be his wife." Loki said, "You will have to, if we get the hammer back." Still Freya said, "I will not go," and she was very angry. She shook so hard that she broke her necklace and it fell to the floor. Then the gods said, "Thor, you must dress like Freya. You will have to play you are the bride." Thor said, "I won't do it. You will all laugh at me. I won't dress up like a girl." They said, "Well, that is the only way we can get the hammer back." Thor said, "I do not like to dress like a girl, but I will do it." Then they dressed Thor up like Freya. They put on Freya's dress, necklace, and veil, and braided his hair. Loki said, "I will dress up too and be your servant." They got into Thor's goat wagon and went into the giant's home. When the frost giant saw them coming, they said, "Get ready, here comes the bride. We will sit down to the table as soon as they come." The dinner was ready on time. The table was full of good things. All sat down. The bride ate a whole ox and 8 salmon before the others had a bite. "She must be very hungry," the frost giant said. "Yes," Loki said, "she was so glad to come. She hasn't eaten anything for 8 days." Then they brought up the mead. The bride drank 3 barrels of mead. "How thirsty she is," said the frost giants. Loki said, "Yes, she is very thirsty. She was so glad to come. She did not drink anything for 8 days." Old Thrym said, "I had everything I wanted but Freya. Now I have Freya." And Thrym went to kiss the bride. He lifted her veil, but her eyes shone like fire. Thrym stepped back. He said, "What makes Freya's eyes shine so?" Loki said, "Oh, she was so glad to come she did not sleep for 8 nights." Then Loki said, "It is time for the hammer. Go and get it and put it in the bride's lap." As soon as the hammer was in his lap, Thor tore off the veil. He took the hammer and whirled it around. Fire flew from it. The fire burned the house and the frost giants ran away. So Thor got his hammer back. The following stories by Miss Smythe were originally published under the title of The Golden Fleece. They have been carefully revised and illustrated for this book. End of The Hammer Lost and Found by E. Louise Smythe.
The Three Chests by Parker Fillmore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Three Chests, the story of the wicked old man of the sea. There was once an honest old farmer who had 3 daughters. His farm ran down to the shores of a deep lake. One day, as he leaned over the water to take a drink, wicked old Wedahinen reached up from the bottom of the lake and clutched him by the beard. "Ouch! Ouch!" the farmer cried. "Let me go!" Wedahinen only held on more tightly. "Yes, I'll let you go," he said, "but only on this condition, that you give me one of your daughters for wife." "Give you one of my daughters? Never!" "Very well, then I'll never let go," wicked old Wedahinen declared, and with that he began jerking at the beard, as if it were a bell rope. "Wait, wait!" the farmer spluttered. Now, he didn't want to give one of his daughters to wicked old Wedahinen, of course not. But at the same time, he was in Wedahinen's power, and he realized that if he didn't do what the old reprobate demanded, he might lose his life, and so leave all 3 of his daughters orphans. Perhaps, for the good of all, he had better sacrifice one of them. "All right," he said, "let me go, and I'll send you my oldest daughter, I promise." So Wedahinen let go his beard, and the farmer scrambled to his feet and hurried home. "My dear," he said to the oldest daughter, "I left a bit of the harness down at the lake. Like a good girl, would you run down and get it for me?" The eldest daughter went at once, and when she reached the water's edge, old Wedahinen reached up and caught her about the waist and carried her down to the bottom of the lake where he lived in a big house. At first he was kind to her. He made her mistress of the house and gave her the keys to all the rooms and closets. He went very carefully over the keys, and pointing to one, he said, "That key you must never use, for it opens the door to a room which I forbid you to enter." The eldest daughter began keeping house for old Wedahinen, and spent her time cooking and cleaning and spinning much as she used to at home with her father. The days went by, and she grew familiar with the house and began to know what was in every room and every closet. At first, she felt no temptation to open the forbidden door. If old Wedahinen wanted to have a secret room, well and good. But why in the world had he given her the key if he really didn't want her to open the door? The more she thought about it, the more she wondered. Every time she passed the room, she stopped a moment and stared at the door. It looked just exactly like the doors that led into all the other rooms. "I wonder why he doesn't want me to open just that door," she kept asking herself. Finally, one day, when old Wedahinen was away, she thought, "I don't believe it would matter if I opened that door just a little crack and peeped in once. No one would know the difference." For a few moments she hesitated, then mustered up courage enough to turn the key in the forbidden lock and throw open the door. The room was a storeroom, with boxes and chests and old jars piled up around the wall. This was unexciting enough, but in the middle of the floor was something that made her start when she saw what it was. It was blood. That's what it was, a pool of dark red blood. She was about to slam the door shut when she saw something else that made her pause. This was a lovely shining ring that lay in the midst of the pool. "Oh," she thought to herself, "what a beautiful ring. If I had it, I'd wear it on my finger." The longer she looked at it, the more she wanted it. "If I'm very careful," she said, "I know I could reach over and pick it up without touching the blood." She tiptoed cautiously into the room. wrapped her skirts tightly about her legs, knelt down on the floor, and stretched her arm over the pool. She picked up the ring very carefully, but even so she got a few drops of blood on her fingers. No matter, she thought, I can wash that off, and see the lovely ring. But later, after she had the door again locked, when she tried to wash the blood off, she found that she couldn't. She tried soap, she tried sand, she tried everything she could think of, but without success. I don't care, she thought to herself. If Wetahinen sees the blood, I'll just tell him I cut my finger by accident. So when Wetahinen came home, she hid the ring and pretended nothing was the matter. After supper, Wetahinen put his head on her lap and said, "Now, my dear, scratch my head and make me drowsy for bed." She began scratching his head as she had many nights before, but at the first touch of her fingers he cried out, "Stop! You're burning my ear. There must be some blood on your fingers. Let me see." He reached up and caught her hand, and when he saw the blood stains, he flew into a towering rage. "I thought so. You've been in the forbidden room." He jumped up, and without allowing her time to say a word, he just cut off her head then and there with no more concern than if she had been a mosquito. After that, he took the body and severed head and threw them into the forbidden room and locked the door. "Now then," he growled, "she won't disobey me again." This was all very well, but now he had no one to keep house for him and cook and scratch his head in the evening, and soon he decided he'd have to get another wife. He remembered that the farmer had 2 more daughters, so he thought to himself that now he'd marry the second sister. He waited his chance, and one day when the farmer was out in his boat fishing, old Wetahinen came up from the bottom of the lake and clutched the boat. When the poor farmer tried to row back to shore, he couldn't make the boat move an inch. He worked and worked at the oars, and wicked old Wetahinen let him struggle until he was exhausted. Then he put his head up out of the water and over the side of the boat, as though nothing were the matter, and said, "Hello." "Oh," the farmer cried, wishing he were safe on shore. "It's you, is it? I wondered what was holding my boat." "Yes," wicked old Wetahinen said, "it's me, and I'm going to hold your boat right here on this spot until you promise to give me another of your daughters." What could the farmer do? He pleaded with Wetahinen, but Wetahinen was firm, and the upshot was that before the farmer again walked dry land, he had promised Wetahinen his second daughter. Well, when he got home, he pretended he had forgotten his axe in the boat, and sent his second daughter down to the lake to get it. Wicked old Wetahinen caught her as he had caught her sister, and carried her home with him to his house at the bottom of the lake. Wetahinen treated the second sister just exactly as he had the first, making her mistress of the house and telling her she might use every key but one. Like her sister, she, too, after a time, gave way to temptation of looking into the forbidden room, and when she saw the shining ring lying in the pool of blood, of course she wanted it, and of course, when she reached to get it, she dabbled her fingers in the blood. So that was the end of her, too, for wicked old Wetahinen, when he saw the blood stains, just cut her head right off, and threw her body and the severed head into the forbidden room, beside the body and head of her sister, and locked the door. Time went by, and the farmer was living happily with his youngest daughter, when one day when he was out chopping wood, he found a pair of fine birch bark brogues. He put them on and instantly found himself walking away from the woods and down to the lake. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. He tried to walk in another direction, but the brogues carried him straight down to the water's edge and out into the lake until he was in waist deep. Then he heard a gruff voice saying, "Hello there, what are you doing with my brogues?" Of course, it was wicked old Wetahinen, who had played that trick to get the farmer into his power again. "What do you want this time?" the poor farmer cried. "I want your youngest daughter," Wetahinen said. "What, my youngest daughter?" "Yes." "I won't give her up," the farmer declared. "I don't care what you do to me, I won't give her up." "Oh, very well," Wetahinen said, and immediately the brogues, which had been standing still while they talked, started walking again. They carried the farmer out into the lake farther and farther, until the water was up to his chin. Wait a minute," he cried. The brogues stopped walking, and Wetahinen said, "Well, do you promise to give her to me?" "No," the farmer began. "She's my last daughter, and—" Before he could say more, the brogues walked on, and the water rose to his nose. In desperation, he threw up his hands and shouted, "I promise! I promise!" So when he got home that day, he said to his youngest daughter, whose name was Lisa, "Lisa, my dear, I forgot my brogues at the lake. Like a good girl, won't you run and get them for me?" So Lisa went to the lake, and Wetahinen, of course, caught her, and carried her down to his house, as he had her 2 sisters. Then the same old story was repeated. Wetahinen made Lisa mistress of the house, and gave her keys to all the doors and closets, with the same prohibition against opening the door of the forbidden room. "If I am mistress of the house," Lisa said to herself, "why should I not unlock every door?" She waited until one day when Wedehinnen was away from home, then went boldly to the forbidden room, fitted the key in the lock, and flung open the door. There lay her two poor sisters with their heads cut off. There in the pool of blood sparkled the lovely ring, but Lisa paid no heed to it. "Wicked old Wedehinnen," Lisa cried. "I suppose he thinks that ring will tempt me, but nothing will tempt me to touch that awful blood." Then she rummaged about, opening boxes and chests and turning things over. In a dark corner she found two pitchers, one marked water of life, the other water of death. "Ha! This is what I want," she cried, taking the pitcher of the water of life. She set the severed heads of her sisters in place, and then with the magic water brought them back to life. She used up all the water of life, so she filled the pitcher marked water of life with the water from the other pitcher, the water of death. She hid her sisters each in a big wooden chest. She shut and locked the door of the forbidden room, and Wedehinnen, when he came home, found her working at her spinning wheel as though nothing unusual had happened. After supper, Wedehinnen said, "Now scratch my head and make me drowsy for bed." So Lisa scratched his wicked old head, and she did it so well that he grunted with satisfaction. "Ah, he said, "that's good. Now, just behind my right ear. Oh, that's it, that's it. You're a good girl, you are. You're not like some of them who do what they're told not to do. Now behind the other ear. Oh, that's fine. Yes, you're a good girl, and if there's anything you want me to do, just tell me what it is." "I want you to send a chest of things to my poor old father," Lisa said. "Just a lot of little nothings, odds and ends that I've picked up about the house. I'd be ashamed to have you open the chest and see them. I do wish you'd carry the chest ashore tomorrow and leave it where my father will find it." "All right, I will," Wedehinnen promised. He was true to his word. The next morning he hoisted one of the chests on his shoulder, the one that had in it the eldest sister. He trudged off with it and tossed it up on shore at a place where he was sure the farmer would find it. Lisa then wheedled him into carrying the second chest that had in it the second sister. This time Wedehinnen wasn't so good-natured. "I don't know what she can always be sending her father," he grumbled. "If she sends another chest, I'll have to look inside and see." Now Lisa, when the second sister was safely delivered, began to plan her own escape. She pulled out another empty chest, and then one evening, after she had succeeded in making old Wedehinnen comfortable and drowsy, she begged him to carry this also to her father. He grumbled and protested, but finally promised. "And you won't look inside, will you? Promise me you won't," Lisa begged. Wedehinnen said he wouldn't, but he intended to just the same. Well, the next morning, as soon as Wedehinnen went out, Lisa took the churn and dressed it up in some of her own clothes. She carried it to the top of the house and perched it on the ridge of the roof before a spinning wheel. Then she herself crept inside the third chest and waited. When Wedehinnen came home, he looked up and saw what he thought was Lisa spinning on the roof. "Hello," he shouted. "What are you doing up there?" Lisa, in the chest, answered in a voice that sounded as if it came from the roof. "I'm spinning. And you, Wedehinnen, my dear, don't forget the chest you promised to carry to my poor old father. It's standing in the kitchen." Wedehinnen grumbled, but because of his promise, he hoisted the chest on his shoulder and started off. When he'd gone a little way, he thought to put it down and take a peep inside. Instantly, Lisa's voice, sounding as if it came from the roof, cried out, "No, no, you promised not to look inside." "I'm not looking inside," Wedehinnen called back. "I'm only resting a minute." Then he thought to himself, "I suppose she's sitting up there so she can watch me." When he'd gone some distance farther, he thought again to set the chest down and open the lid, but instantly Lisa's voice, as from a long way off, called out, "No, no, you promised not to look inside." "Who's looking inside?" he called back, pretending he was only resting. Every time he thought it would be safe to put down the chest and open the lid, Lisa's voice cried out, "No, no, you promised not to." "Mercy on us," old Wedehinnen fumed to himself. Who would have thought she could see so far? On the shore of the lake, when he threw down the chest in disgust, he tried one last time to raise the lid. Instantly Lisa's voice cried out, "No, no, you promised not to." "I'm not looking inside," Wedehinnen roared, and in a fury he left the chest and started back into the water. All the way home he grumbled and growled. "Nice way to treat a man, always making him carry chests. I won't carry another one, no matter how much she begs me." When he came near home, he saw the spinning wheel still on the roof and the figure still seated before it. "Why haven't you got my dinner ready?" he called out angrily. The figure at the spinning wheel made no answer. "What's the matter with you?" Wedehinnen cried. "Why are you sitting there like a wooden image instead of cooking my dinner?" Still the figure made no answer, and in a rage Wedehinnen began climbing the roof. He reached out blindly, clutched at Lisa's skirt, and jerked it so hard that the churn came clattering down on his head. It knocked him off the roof, and he fell all the way to the ground and cracked his wicked old head wide open. "Ouch! Ouch!" he roared in pain. "Just wait till I get hold of that Lisa." He crawled to the forbidden room and poured over himself the water that was in the pitcher marked water of life. But it wasn't the water of life at all. It was the water of death, and so it didn't help his wicked old cracked head at all. In fact, it just made it worse and worse. Lisa and her sisters were never again troubled by him, nor was anyone else that lived on the shores of that lake. "Wonder what's become of wicked old Wedehinnen," people began saying. Lisa thought she knew, but she didn't tell. End of The Three Chests by Parker Fillmore. Recorded by Colleen McMahon.